Let's talk about the Nintendo Switch. Last night, Nintendo held its Switch presentation, and it unveiled the hybrid console, revealing its price, its release date, and some of the titles that will be available both at launch and later in the year. So, the first thing to say is that the Nintendo Switch will be available on March 3rd, and it's going to sell for about $300 in the market, not including tax, of course. And the market analysts predicted that the Switch would be between $250 and $300. So it's going to be on the higher end of the market price that the analysts were projecting. We should also point out that some of the accessories for the console too have had their prices revealed. To get an extra set of Joy-Cons, which are the sort of motion controllers that come with the console, that's going to cost you about an extra $80. And then the grip for the controllers, which is kind of what holds it together and makes it look like a more traditional controller, that's going to cost you another $30. So this console, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be that affordable for a lot of families that might be interested in. What do you think?
Yeah, it does seem pretty striking that they would start off in the $299, almost $300 range, especially when that's what, and other media outlets have been reporting this, that's what the current generation of Microsoft and Sony systems are priced in right now. And you would think that, like what they did with the Wii back in 2007-ish, it almost seems like they're wanting to compete with the current generation according to price, and I would argue possibly even system specs. We don't have any yet to know what's in this thing yet until we see one and can tear it apart. Probably what Nintendo is looking at right now is the current market instead of the upcoming one, and that's a little concerning, especially with the price point.
The Switch is definitely a blend of both the Wii, the original Wii, and the Wii U. Because the Wii, of course, with its motion control, it had these motion controls which were meant to capture sort of a casual audience, and that compounded well with the sort of low price of the console compared to some of the other consoles that were on the market or would come onto the market. The thing is that it's blending that sort of casual net that's trying to cast out and grab an audience with the Wii U. The Wii U was arguably an attempt at catching a more hardcore audience in some sense because it had upgraded resolution and graphics compared to the Wii, and there was some sort of outreach towards more third-party sources in terms of the games. But it seems to me that the Switch is trying to blend those two. It has that sort of casual feel of trying to blend these sort of next-gen motion controls, but also trying to, it has these emphasis on some of the games, which we'll be talking about later on in the podcast. There's a new game coming out for the Switch called the 1-2 Switch, which is very comparable to Wii Sports for the original Wii, in that it's basically a showcase of the motion controls for the game and also how the game operates, some of the, what you might call the gimmicks of the Switch at play. And I think that's kind of what they're trying to capture here. But I think the problem is that this price point is really going to be a threshold for a lot of families who might necessarily want to be invested in the console. You can't really compare this to the original price point of the Wii, which was unbeatable for a lot of people who wanted it back then.
Right. Even though when it came out, you saw the same sort of problems in the market where you just couldn't get a hold of a Wii during that Christmas season. And nobody could. They had limited quantity. And again, this is the Teddy Ruxpin thing all over again with Nintendo. We just saw it with the NES Classic, the Mini NES, where there were problems with people getting copies in the market. They only distributed maybe 5 or 6 per store, in some cases 10, 12, and there were 50 people who wanted it.
Well, it's worth mentioning right now, too, that already on Amazon, pre-orders for the Switch are sold out, as well as our pre-orders for Breath of the Wild, which is the new Zelda game. So there's kind of a question of whether this is going to be another understocked product from Nintendo.
Right, and the Mini NES didn't even have a pre-order for that system. So it's interesting to see that Nintendo is still writing this. And to touch on your point about trying to balance the hardcore gamer market with the casual gamer market, I'm going to put out this as a perspective. I don't think Nintendo has been truly able to get a hold of the hardcore market, and I don't think they ever will, because I don't think that's their game, more or less. It seems like with the unveiling of the original NES in the New York market around after the 1983 video game crash, when Nintendo started up and the Famicom was released in Japan, started up in terms of its video game operations, and then that was brought stateside, we saw something in that for the marketing for the US, we had to have certain things, and my family got one of these when they came out. You had Rob the Robot, who was a little robot who would move his arms around and play games with, and it never really worked right. And then you had the Zapper, which sometimes worked right, and you played Duck Hunt and other games. And then there was the Power Pad later. But you had all of these accessories that made the Nintendo look more like a computer system than a toy. Because with the video game crash, everyone wanted to avoid video games as toys, because that's so Atari 2600, people would say. But that said, Nintendo was able to use these as a gimmick and stay in the market. And Nintendo kept up with that, even though for the SNES they didn't have to have a gimmick. Now it was appropriate and proper socially to have a video game system. They still had peripherals, and I didn't even mention the Power Glove, which didn't work for the NES. But for Super NES, they had things like the Super Scope 6, SNES Mouse. They had other peripherals like that. And then for the 64, it seems like they were completely out of this idea of peripherals. The GameCube had a device to let you play Game Boy games if you attached it to the bottom. Really, Nintendo was out of the peripheral market for a long time until they got back to the Wii, and the Wiimote really sold that point. Here's this thing you have to have. You'll have one that comes with the system. And they really lost their footing with the Wii U because the gamepad, it looked like something you could detach from the system, but you really couldn't. There was this great article, by the way, if you're interested, on The Verge, that talks about how the Switch in its marketing appears to do right what the Wii U did wrong, and that now you have this portable system, you can take it outside, you can take it with you, you can create a network with other gamers who have these things, and to be able to play together. And that's what this idea of Wii was really all about. But they really dropped the ball. And my point on the Wii U is that if you have one person with the gamepad, everyone else, what are they supposed to do? They can't bring additional gamepads and hook it up to the system. But now you've got something to where you could do almost like gamers did in the 90s when they played Doom on their computers. They could bring them together in the same room and create a network, a LAN, and get the IPX set up or whatever their network setting was. And they could play together Doom and Quake and these other games. And I think that's where they're going to capitalize really well in the casual market, and I really think that's where they're going to clean up on this, but not the hardcore folks.
Well, I think the thing to mention about the hardcore gaming aspect is that hardcore gaming has never really been part of Nintendo's core philosophy, right? Nintendo's core philosophy has always been sort of making the most fun product available out of the materials available. That was kind of the idea behind Game & Watch. When Game & Watch first came out, you have all these sort of, watches on the market and whatnot. Can we use that technology to make something fun out of it? It's always been, Nintendo has always been had ironically, this remix philosophy of taking existing materials and trying to make something fun out of that. And for me, that's why they don't really capture the casual market. What you're saying before about...
You mean the hardcore market?
The hardcore market, right. So for me, when you're talking about sort of people coming together, like taking their computers and whatnot and trying to play Doom together, that's kind of similar to how kids back in the day would take their games over to their friend's house and play them together. Mm-hmm. I think that plays into one of the features of the Switch, which is that the Switch is actually region-free, mm-hmm. which is a bit of a surprising move because Nintendo's consoles in recent years have all been sort of region-locked. And for the audience listening, what I mean by the region-free aspect of the Switch is that if you purchase a Switch game in Europe, that game can be played on an American console, whereas previously all games would be region locked. You couldn't play a European game on an American console. You'd have to play it on a European console.
I'll throw out that when I played the original Super Mario 3, it was also hard to get, and back in the 90s when this came out, you couldn't find the cartridge. I had to get it at a video rental store, and the very first time I asked them to hold it for me, another person got it, but it wasn't even Super Mario 3. It was the Famicom Super Mario 3 with an adapter to play with a Nintendo unit. So in order to play with a region-locked system in the US, you had to have some type of adapter.
Now, this is similar to sort of the Xbox model of a yearly subscription. Well, actually, we don't even know, because they haven't really revealed much in terms of the multiplayer, like if this is going to be in installments, if there's going to be different payment plans and whatnot.
But some type of monetization scheme where Nintendo is going to be able to pick up on what Sony and Microsoft have been doing.
Well, we should point out that the multiplayer will be free after the launch of the console for a little while, but it will begin to be a paid service beginning in the third quarter of 2017, which is around fall. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to think about this in terms of the Xbox Live model. So one of the things, as an Xbox 360 owner back in the day, you had the Wii, you had the PS3, and you also had the Xbox 360. And one of the talking points for the PS3, anyone who was interested in Sony at the time, was that the PS3 had free multiplayer capabilities at the time. Mm-hmm. You had to pay for Xbox Live in terms of Microsoft, and that was kind of used as a bargaining point in Sony's favor.
Mm-hmm.
But the opposite argument was, yeah, you have to pay for Xbox Live, but the quality of the multiplayer is much better as a result of that because they actually have money to spend on their servers and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And generally there's a lot of good latency and whatnot. So it is interesting because one of the criticisms I've seen of the Wii U in terms of its multiplayer is that there's a lot of latency issues and whatnot. It's not that fluid. And it might be fascinating to see how that might be ameliorated in terms of the Switch. Will having paid multiplayer services mean that the services will be better overall?
At least one thing I'll say this, at least with monetization, people have to put their money where their mouth is. They have to say, not only do I like this game, I'm willing to commit in such a way that I'm going to put down dollars for this. And if people do that, largely enough, people might be more willing to actually engage. It's very easy to have a free service and not use it. That's why so many people subscribe to Netflix streaming, but local libraries have streaming movies for free in some of their apps, and hardly anyone uses those in comparison. So the money aspect does bode well potentially for how the service might be used.
Well, one of the games that definitely will be taking advantage of that multiplayer service will be Splatoon 2. Mm-hmm. Splatoon 2 was announced during the presentation. That will be a summer release. So one of the other ways that Nintendo has been differentiating themselves from both Sony and Microsoft with the Switch is that the Switch is going to be cartridge based, which is an interesting move because the Wii U, of course, was CD based. The Wii was CD based. The GameCube was CD based.
Well, the last time they had a cartridge-based home console system was the Nintendo 64. And I have to say, with the cartridge-based format for the Switch, imagine you're buying one of these competing game systems that's out now with one of these competitors, and you have a 500 gigabyte hard drive, right? And then you get some of these discs, and these things are huge, huge games. You have to install the games on the hard drive in order to play. Well, with the Switch, you don't have to worry about necessarily the hard drive size there, because the games, the space on the cartridges themselves will take care of that issue. So there's also the loading time, the install time, the fact that once you are done with one game, you have to get the data off the hard drive in order to play another game. This is just swapping the cartridge. So it seems like Nintendo was set to clean up in that area, and this was a pretty wise move, even along those lines.
Because a criticism, I think, of the Wii U, correct me if I'm wrong, was that a lot of the purchases were tied to the console, right, instead of an account. So you couldn't purchase games on a single account and then have those games move over to a different console. So, for instance, if you bought something on an account on your 3DS, that wouldn't necessarily transfer over to your Wii U account.
Although the Virtual Console on the Switch is supposed to start with GameCube games, which is something, again, that hasn't been done yet.
In terms of the selling points for the Switch right now, you have to consider that, yes, it has a Zelda title coming out during the launch, and apparently Super Mario Odyssey, which is a game we haven't really discussed yet, that will be another major title for the Switch. That's not coming out until the holidays.
Nintendo probably staggered the releases to try to keep interest, although I do think it's a mistake not to include a Mario and a Zelda game at launch. That just seems like a missed opportunity. Pokemon, they could wait until Christmas, but not Mario, not Zelda. And they definitely got Zelda out this time correctly, but not Mario. With the Wii U, their sales were down, allegedly, because they didn't have enough third-party support.
Is Nintendo trying to capture sort of the same logic behind, say, Grand Theft Auto? Grand Theft Auto has, of course, been a really popular sandbox game. In a lot of ways, it's kind of the progenitor of most of the famous sandbox games. And I think that Nintendo is trying to capture new audiences with these sandbox games.
That seems to be what's going on in the video game market. Of course, if you say the words Call of Duty, everyone knows what I mean when I bring that up as an illustration. How many versions of that game are there out there? But it seems like Nintendo is falling victim to that.
Well, we mentioned earlier, too, with like original titles such as Splatoon. Splatoon was a completely, original IP, and that became a wild success. And I think that's just an example of Nintendo going into an area that they're not normally going into, which is like a first-person/third-person shooter kind of scenario. And Nintendo needs to take a little more risks, I think.
And I hope that after the failure of the Wii U, and I do like the Wii U, but I do hope that after that failure in the market, they don't just play it safe, and they take more risks like what you're saying with Splatoon. And I think that if they can do that, they might find a little more investment in not only the hardcore players, but also their core audience, which is the casual market. I'll bring in the Pareto principle, by the way, the 80-20 principle. Nintendo has to please 80% of its fans who are casual gamers in order to do what the hardcore gamers want in terms of supporting games with high resolution, high definition graphics. And if they can follow the Pareto rule of gaming, let's call it the Nintendo Pareto rule, if they can follow that rule, I think they'll do well with this current generation that's coming out. And I was reminded of playing Twilight Princess, and the problem that I had with Twilight Princess was first with the fishing game. I got caught in that thing for almost a week. I couldn't figure it out because you had to do it a certain way and there was a trick to it. Chase, let's talk a quick minute about two things, the Virtual Console games and the Joy-Cons.
What's Joy-Con?
So I believe Joy-Con is the name for what these new controllers are going to be with the Switch, right?
Oh, so this isn't an event you go to.
No, that's Gen Con, not Joy-Con. Although that does sound a little familiar, doesn't it? So with these devices, I really do like what I've seen in the video. And the cool thing is when you detach them from the Switch screen itself, they actually do have an L and an R button that we're used to attach it to the screen.
Right.
And now you take it out and you can use them. This reminds me a lot of the Game Boy Micro, actually, if you got a chance to play those. And I hope that we're able to take these games out with the Switch. I really hope if I have to buy another license for Zelda 64 or Mario 64, I really do hope that I can take the system with me with the Virtual Console, Zelda, Mario 64 on the system with me to play at a friend's house. And I really do hope, knock on wood, that they are able to add online functionality to games like Super Metroid that don't already have it. Wouldn't that be great to play Super Metroid with friends in an online capacity, have certain goals that you're working with, or Super Mario World, play that two-player? Why not? And why not add that functionality even to games and extend the current multiplayer functionality that you had on those games?
Yeah, because I got a Nintendo 3DS XL, a new Nintendo 3DS XL, that comes preloaded with Super Mario World. And one of the interesting things, of course, is that when you have it preloaded on your 3DS XL, well, that means you can't really play with someone else.
Right.
So you can't take advantage of the multiplayer aspect of the game. And I hope that's something you can do with the Switch, like you're saying.
But let's say with your 3DS XL, let's say Nintendo had built into the system where you can create a Bluetooth network. And now the two devices can connect and you can recognize each other and add each other as friends. And now through kind of like the original Game Boy Connect cable where you could connect multiple Game Boys, now you can create a network with the Virtual Console game and now you can play it. I know this is pie in the sky. I really hope they eventually do this. Nintendo's issue with casual gamers, the problem has always been that they're always willing to reintroduce casual games on the Virtual Console, but they're not really interested in adding any more content or value. The only exception to that might be the re-release of Virtual Console games on the Wii U, in which they added certain additional game elements, or the 3DS, where certain games might have 3D elements, like Kid Icarus in 3D or something like that. So I guess the big takeaway from this is Nintendo wants to share the joy, and maybe they will. I hope this is something that is boding well for Nintendo's future.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think that there are definitely both positives and negatives to the Switch from what I've seen. I like some of the games I saw. I'm not really a fan of the price. I think it's a little steep for what we're being offered. I like the fact that it's region-free. I'm kind of iffy on the paid multiplayer. We'll have to see because, like I said, we weren't given any information in terms of payment installments, right? Like with Xbox Live, you can pay a yearly fee, you can pay a monthly fee, or you can pay a fee over the course of 3 months. It'll be interesting to see if Nintendo tries to do that model, or if they go sort of the Pokebank route, which we mentioned before, which is like a yearly subscription for $5, which I don't think that the multiplayer is going to be that cheap. But we'll have to see. I mean, that's the thing is with this presentation is that as much as it kind of answered some of our questions, it leaves many more in our mind.
Such as, what is in this thing? What's comprised of? What type of processor are we looking at? What type of onboard memory? What is the interface going to look like practically for getting the cartridges in and out? How do we establish the networks? Questions like this matter, and an overview of that in terms of technical details in the breakout and white papers would really be appreciated at this point, but it looks like we'll have to see. I'm really hoping, like the Moblin in the original Legend of Zelda, we get more of the bait and less of the Switch.
It's a bad joke, Sam.
It's a very bad joke. Grumble, grumble.
Join us for our next podcast where we talk about something else. See you later, guys.
See you later.
Thanks.